my inspiration for wanting to get this webinar series going, because it made me realize that there's so much wisdom out there that's maybe not fully grounded in the National Home Funeral Alliance, but is so deeply connected to the work that we do. And that wisdom is held in people like Amy, Wright, Glenn. And so I felt like for anybody who's part of our membership that doesn't have a relationship with her work, it was imperative that we bring her to you to learn from, because I know that in my life as a friend and as a human and as a home funeral guide, and just in all of my relationships, what I've learned from Amy has been a huge part of my life. So I'm just excited to share her with you. Amy's here. She's the founder of the Institute for the Study of Birth, Breath, and Death, and writer of 2 books that she'll share with you in a little bit. One of my favorites is Holding Space, and she'll tell us more about that at the end. I highly recommend reading those. The way that this is going to go is Amy's going to share some slides and talk about really what it means to hold space as a home funeral guide. You know, we have so much wisdom and so much knowledge, and there's a fine line when we're helping families and knowing the difference between helping and just being by their side. So Amy's going to give us some tips about how to do that really well when we're working with families and when we're being in our own families. So Amy, I'm going to turn it over to you and to Tim to share your slides. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Tim. I'm very grateful to be here. It's truly an honor. And in this picture that you see, I am sharing a picture of my family. Speaking of holding space for families, this is my grandfather, my dad's dad, and these are 3 of my paternal aunts, and there are 4 sisters in that family, and the 4th one is taking the picture. So when I look at this picture, I know these women since I was a baby. You know, they held me as an infant. They helped raise me. And of course, with my grandfather, it's the same. So it's a real honor to be here. And these are the questions I reflect on both personally and professionally every day. Not only because it's my work in this world to inspire people to deep inquiry relating to holding space or companioning, but also because that's what I try to do in all my relationships, whether I'm working as a mom, whether I'm teaching, whether I'm in relationship, even that's a difficult connection. I imagine what it's like to hold space for that difficulty. And when I define holding space, I define it as being compassionately present to what is. And that can be joy, that can be sorrow, that can be an incredible moment in one's life that's really going to stand out forever, or it can be just the mundane stuff of washing the dishes and scrambling eggs and shuttling, you know, oneself to yoga class or taking kids to, you know, their martial arts or their ballet. It's really in the nitty-gritty and in the profoundly sacred. The capacity to hold space, I believe, is the capacity to be present compassionately to what is. And I want to really highlight what that means in terms of companioning the bereaved, because all of you involved in the National Home Funeral Alliance work, either as doulas or death midwives or people who are home funeral guides. You know, there's so many hats you can wear, and you have a lot of knowledge, and you are vanguards in terms of changing how our culture approaches the narrative of death and dying. And I bow to that. That's amazing. And in that role as a pioneer, it can be really important to pause and reflect on the subtle energy that we bring to it, the capacity to listen, to be present to our own suffering, and to show up for families without trying to walk in and say, okay, I'm here to fix, or I'm here to guide, I'm here to lead. It's really, I'm here to listen, I'm here to observe, I'm here to witness, I'm here to learn, a humbling approach. So Tim, if you can shift the slide here. My official thank you to the National Home Funeral Alliance. Now, I came across the work of the National Home Funeral Alliance a few years ago and interviewed the then President Lee Webster for a Philly Voice article about the phenomena of home funeral and the kind of renaissance of it in the United States. And it was one of the most fascinating interviews I have done. And I've interviewed a lot of really interesting people in the birth world, the death world, and in the mindfulness community around parenting or mindful living, spirituality. And my conversation with Lee was very transformative for me, even as a scholar on these topics. I really admired her no-nonsense approach, her willingness to think of history, her willingness to approach the home funeral experience as something that's part of our rights, you know, the right to be with the bereaved, the right to be with the family, the right to be with the dying, the right to be with the body after death, the right we have to own that experience and not only see it as something that professionals do, but to have it be in our own family, to care for each other through dying. And I found an interesting parallel with the birth movement, that we want to be with each other through birthing too. So I bring that to your attention in case you haven't read that article, and I'll send the link to Danny. But that was really my entrance into the National Home Funeral Alliance work, was through Lee. So I need to start by thanking you for inviting me, but also thanking Lee. All right, Tim, next slide. So Danny had mentioned my writing and my books, and so far I've written 2. I hope I can write more before my time on earth ends. I love to write. It's a really powerful healing modality for me. And the first book I wrote relates to the connections between being a chaplain, I trained as a hospital chaplain, and being a birth doula, and how motherhood really fused those together for me. So it's a shorter book. I wrote it when my son was about 6 to 10 months old. I wrote it when he napped, when he slept. I would wake up and literally the words were just like washing through my mind, and I would put them to the computer and to the paper. The second book came about because I was called by Parallax Press in California saying, you know, if you ever write about dying, we would love to publish this because we really liked your first book. And I know you write about breath and birth, but what about just dying? Can you do that? And I said, well, I think I can focus in on it, but they're all linked together. You know, it's all linked. We die because we're born, and we grieve because we love. And those things are linked. And when I think about holding space, and in the intro of this book, I remember the first time I came upon that term, and it was through the work of Heather Plett, who's a Canadian writer. And she wrote an article called Holding Space, 8 Ways to Do It Well, something like this. And in it, she describes the death of her mother, and she describes what it was like to be with her sister through this experience, and the nurse, the hospice nurse who held space for the mother's dying and the sister's grieving. And she uses the term holding space, and she describes 8 facets of what that might mean. I loved that article, and I thought it was really well done. And I thought that really describes for me what I'm trying to get across in my writing. So that's where the origin for me of that term came. I didn't coin the term holding space. It's used in many contexts now, but that was the first time I heard it. Okay, Tim. Now let me go back to a point I made earlier. The reason we grieve is because we love. And just pause and imagine a world where we didn't love and death still existed. We would have death. We may even have funerals. We may have rituals around burial for the sake of hygiene. But there probably wouldn't be that many tears. And there wouldn't be a sense of missing or longing or loss, because all of those emotions link into the fact that we love and we miss. And we miss people when they die. And I bring this up because to hold present for what is with compassion when it comes to grief is a challenge in our culture, because we don't know what to do with grief. So like we have medicalized it so much that we don't know quite what to do with the energy of it. It's become something that is treated therapeutically. It's treated in a really compartmentalized way. It's like you have a certain amount of time to be sad, and then you need to be coming back to normal. And people often don't know how to talk about grief, or tears might be seen as weak, or funerals are the place to cry, but after that, hey, life goes on. And I think the depth of love that we have for each other is not limited to 4 days of grieving or 4 months of grieving. It really will go through the lifetime. And Alan Wolfelt, who wrote about companioning, says that we grieve because we've loved, and we love for a lifetime. And that means there will be grief at points throughout the lifetime as we remember the people we care for. So to companion someone through that, or to companion ourselves through and with grief, is to also companion through love. Like, grief doesn't exist without it. Okay, next slide. I love this picture. I know most of us right now are looking at this, and we're in the middle between these two. We're not infants at all, but we're probably not really, really aged. I'm 45. I'm in the middle of this. And I have pictures of myself as a little one, but I don't know what I'll look like with that many wrinkles, and if I'll even live that long. But here is maybe the great-great-grandmother who is clearly close to her own dying, holding the newest member of the family. The old matriarch holding the infant. And she's probably held many babies. She maybe have held the grandmother of this little one. And I bring this to your attention because we enter the mortal world, and we leave this mortal world, and whatever happens on either end is something people have spent many centuries discussing. But all of us watching this have been called to these threshold points. Some of you may even do birth work. I know all of you do death work. And death isn't necessarily closer to this older woman than it is the baby. I do a lot of work around pregnancy loss, miscarriage, infant death. And I've been with babies as they die. So the love that links these generations, and the stories that link them, the heartache that links them, the dysfunction and the function of every family. When we walk into a situation because we're called to serve, to companion is to slow down and observe that sacred link, and to listen and to witness with compassion what is. And what is could be a great amount of regret, an incredible peace. It could be some tender moment like this, where there's so many emotions in her face and a little sleeping baby. So to companion and to hold space, I believe, are almost synonymous terms. And I hope that as you watch this, you consider why you were called to this work. Why were you called to be present for death? And what does it mean inside of you to slow the work down of that and just center into the beingness of being present for people in these most vulnerable and sacred times? Okay, Tim. I love this picture. This is a recent image. The little boy in the striped shirt and the little girl on the right with the flowers on her waist are the children of a very close friend of mine. And the two children in the middle are also children of friends. And this is in Asheville, North Carolina. And the body that's wrapped in the white, covered with those gorgeous flowers, is the grandmother of the two children I mentioned first. And she died in their home. And she died with her family around her. And as they held vigil over those weeks before she became so sick from pancreatic cancer that she died, these kids surrounded her, wrote stories to her, colored pictures for her. They were linked to her. They didn't put her somewhere else. They kept her in the family circle, and they sang, and both of their parents are musicians. Music surrounded her, family surrounded her, love surrounded her. And the grief was held in the love, and the love was held in the grief, and there were tears, and it was sacred and it was hard, but it was also quite beautiful. And I think when you all see this picture, I think you see what might be called an ideal death. You have the family, you have the generations, you have the body being respected, you have a very natural green funeral and burial. And I think most of you are called to this work because you want to transform how death has been approached in this culture. And this might represent the alternative you're trying to lift up. But I'd like you to think about the fact that even if you served this family and you played a role as the funeral guide, or you played a role in the arrangement of the burial, and you did it well, but you didn't companion or hold space, I would say you're missing a key piece. Because we can do the task of a thing, of an action, of a role, but the heart of it is what I'm trying to speak to today. To look at the little boy and the little girl and those children, What does it mean to listen to them as they talk about their grandmother? When I went to visit this family just a few weeks ago in Nashville, the first thing said to me by Avi, the little boy, was, Nana died. We were doing clay together, talking, just look, big eyes, Amy, Nana died. I said, yeah, I know. And just wanted to talk, wanted to share. Okay, yeah, thank you. So I believe we are complex, mortal, multidimensional, and in relationship all the time. Whether we're in relationship with self, alone, or in nature, and we don't really see other people, we're still in relationship. We're still connecting to dimensions that are multifaceted, because we have dream state, deep sleep state, waking state. There's so many capacities in each person to feel so many different emotions. I mean, each of us are like a patchwork quilt. There's so many parts to each of us. And in that sense, the mortality of each person is almost it's very sad sometimes to me that such complex, multifaceted beings die, because it takes so long just to get to know one of them. I have a little boy who's every day changing and growing, and soon will be 8 years old. And I feel I know him really, really well, but he still surprises me with the things he says. And so we're always, I believe we're always growing. And so to think that one day that dies, and one day he dies, there's for me a great sorrow, and but I really like the fact that we're always growing. I just want that to keep happening. And I can understand why people create afterlife systems where that does continue to happen in their belief. But I want to highlight the picture here. Look at the women, the holding of the cheeks and the touching of the forehead and the eye contact. So many times when death is happening, we can see some really intimate moments between people. And sometimes things are said that may have not been said for decades, but needed to be said for decades, right? Sometimes resolutions are made, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes people die without that piece of healing relationships that have been fractured. Regardless, when I'm called to as a chaplain into a room like this, my first role is to witness what my teacher used to call the living human document. Just to witness, just to be present, just to have this humbleness to the miracle of what I'm about to watch and see. And that's to recognize this is not about me. It's not about me changing their mind or fixing the situation. It's really about me leaning into a listening mode, being present, and then why I'm called, to do my best to serve. Okay, Tim. I love this book. Not everyone does, I'm sure, because there's so many different takes on every book, but for me, I really love this book. And I love Alan Wolfelt's work. And many of you may know him, many of you may have studied with him. And he's the founder and director of the Center for Loss and Life Transition in Colorado. And he writes about companioning, the mourner. And what he says is companioning, it comes from the term, the word pan is bread, and it's to sit down next to someone and break the bread. To companion is to not have a hierarchy of I'm the expert and you're the student. But we're both human, we're both mortal, we both have these bodies that are born and that we die. And wow, what does that mean? Let's break some bread, drink some wine, let's talk about this. And to companion is to recognize in the other the complexity, right? To witness, to honor, not to try to fix, their shadow parts, their difficult parts, because we all have that. But to listen. And then we have other hats too. So this goes to what Danny was saying. All of you who are listening to this wear many hats in your lifetime and in your work. So if I'm a nurse, I have the hat on that's the nurse hat. And if I'm called into a room where I need to wear my nurse hat and give some advice or give some options or to highlight something that might not be safe, I need to wear my nurse hat. But I also have companioning, and I can put that on. And in fact, I think it's possible for companioning to dovetail any profession, whether I'm a plumber or an arborist or a beautician or, a doctor. I can companion those who I meet and also myself when I approach people or myself with this attitude. Presence, I'm here to bear witness to you. I'm looking you in the eye. I'm honoring who you are as a human being. I'm not going to try to jump into your life and take control. Okay. Next slide, please. Now, this is a picture of two men in Gaza after a bombing incident. And obviously one is incredibly bereft. Something terrible has happened. And his friend has an arm. And in that sense, notice he's not, stop, right now, stop. Get yourself together, you know, control that. It's this, I'm gonna contain and hold space for the disorder, the confusion, the hurt that is normal and needs to come through because we love, and something precious has just died. Something precious has just been destroyed. And this man's world will never be the same. It's irrevocably changed. And his friend or his brother, whoever that man, other man is holding space, literally holding him. And I believe part of why it's hard for us in our culture to hold space well is because we are very ordered. We don't like confusion so much. We want time to be structured well. We all like our calendars. We like to know what's happening next. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if it doesn't parallel and allow for the softer, more feminine, more intuitive, go with the flow, slow it down energies, if we're always checking our phone every day, if we're always online every day, if we're always going, when can we slow down to really listen even to ourselves? Let alone show up for someone in their most vulnerable place. Okay, next. I don't know if I need to say anything next. No, just kidding. I think this is a great image because it shows to me how we even like to organize the stages of grief. Like, okay, first there's shock, and then we become numb, and then there's denial. Like, you know, maybe this does work in a cycle, and it does dip like this, and then finally we have loss adjustment, right, or reconciliation. But what I find fun and interesting and true about this image is that most of us go like this, all through those feelings in 1 hour even, right? And that can be what we do for 10 years as we make space and hold space for a really difficult loss in our own lives. So I find it interesting that even in a culture that is death phobic or grief phobic, when we do consider grief, we want to map it out. We want to organize it. And so much of I believe the reality of grief is really organic. It's really fluid. It's really messy. And to hold space means, you know, that's normal. I'm going to open to that capacity in my heart to say, there's parts of me that I may never fully understand, even of myself in my lifetime. And I can still love me, and I can still honor that, even as it's messy. Okay, next slide. So another piece that Wolfelt brings up is this compassionate curiosity. When we hold space well, there is a curiosity. It's compassionate presence to what it is, but also curiosity, like, why is that? Teach me about this. My heart is open to explore even this difficult truth. So I'm curious about what it means for the people in a family when there's a stillborn birth. I'm really actually curious. Who in the family can talk about it? Who in the family names the baby? Who in the family remembers the birth? Who in the family a year later still remembers the birthday and sends a card or calls the family? Right? Who's going to forget? Who's going to want to push away? Who's not going to want to call? Like, I'm curious, like, why? Why does that happen? And to teach me. So if I'm sitting next to a friend who's gone through something really hard, a lot of what I want to do is just listen, because she's the expert or he's the expert in their story. So please make time in your work as home funeral guides, in your work as doulas, in your work promoting and teaching people about their rights to have access and personal access to the bodies of those they love. Please remember, in that work, there should be spaces, I believe, where this compassionate curiosity opens to deep listening. And I don't believe I can listen well to another unless I've taken the time to listen to my own self. Okay, next, Tim. Now for me, because of my work, a lot of people will ask me, well, what do you think happens after we die? Amy, what do you think? You know, even in my work as a doula, people will ask me this because they know I've studied comparative religion, and they know I have an interest in philosophy. So, well, what do you think? What do you think? And if I'm asked, okay, I will choose to share a piece of that and then say, well, what about you? I'll try to always shift the spotlight back. But if I'm not asked, I don't want to.
I think she'll come back. Let's just give her a second here. I wonder if she knows she's muted. I've been on a call with her before, and it has cut out for a second. I'll send her a quick message.
Clearly, heaven has a new angel, this kind of thing. I think that would be really hard for families who are atheists. I don't know what their faith is. Does heaven have a new angel? Maybe not. Let the family, my point with this slide is that we all need to make meaning of loss in our own way. And that's the right of the bereaved. That is the right of those who are in the middle of loss. And all of us have been in the middle of loss. So it's all of our rights. But if I'm holding space professionally, especially for a community or a family or a class, my job is to listen and make it safe for that person to start that journey of making meaning of loss. Not to come in and say, I've come up with a really great theory and let me teach this to you, unless they ask, and I used to teach courses on comparative religion and philosophy. So that was fun. I love doing that. But that's not the role of holding space. That's another hat. That's my teach about world religions hat. That's not I'm holding space for you hat. Okay, next. This is the gentleman who taught me so much about this work. He was the head chaplain at the Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital, and he was the director of the clinical pastoral education program that I studied in for the 9-10 months that I knew him well. He really embodied the messy, wonderful complexity of the human self. So for instance, he taught how to companion well, and he gave us great skills, and he did so in a way that was really abrasive. So it was like, the most gentle things would come out of this tall, imposing man, and he would kind of shout them sometimes even. And so, I write about it in my first book. There is a memory I have of Johnny's pounding the table, as we studied with him. You have to be feminine, be feminine. And he's just shouting at us, hitting his hand or hitting the table loud, like a Marine Corps leader, instructing us with a very, very typically masculine energy to be feminine. And I just remember giggling, like, this guy, I just love him. He's so interesting. The complexity of that was really fascinating for me. And I learned so much from him. Okay, Tim. And one of the things he taught, and this goes right into the companioning piece, is he would say, well, often people would ask him in our class, well, what do I say? What should I say? I mean, literally, I've just watched a father bury his teenage daughter after a suicide. Or, not bury, but prepare for the funeral, because you're in the hospital, you don't deal with the burial. It's like emotional triage. I've been present for suicide attempts and suicide, and been with the parents. I mean, what should be said? Can anything be said? It's such a humbling hurt. And so what he taught us was a kind of 3-step process that helped us have a grounding in those very difficult moments when we're showing up into someone's literal hell. He would say, you listen for the words that carry the most emotion. And in those moments, pretty much every word would. And then repeat back to the person a part of what you've heard. I heard you say, would you like to tell me more? And by honing in on the place where emotion kind of pops out of the terrain of the human heart, and saying, I saw it. I saw that moment where the eyes teared up, or where the voice cracked, or where the person held their chest. When the body tells me it's touching something hard, and if I'm truly going to companion through that hardship, I want that human being to know I'm not afraid to go there with them. I'm not afraid to listen. So by saying, I heard you say, your grandma always liked to garden. And when that person said it, they just wept. And so I listened, and then I go back to that. I heard you say your grandma always liked to garden. Could you tell me more? And the person may not want to, and he has the right to say, no, I don't want to talk about that. But 9 times out of 10 in my experience, there's a relief, almost like, oh, you want to know about that? Because as I said, in our culture, there's not a lot of space for that chaos of hurt to pop out. And we are pretty grief phobic. We like to organize things. So, we assume someone's grieving well if they can speak about it without a lot of breaking down. Oh, she broke down, as if it were negative. But really here, what John DeVelder would teach us is it's in those moments where the heart opens and there's a quote, a breakdown or opening, that we want to go in. Tell me more. So I think this is a great technique for anything. I do this with my son. I pick him up from SALT Academies where he goes to school. And we'll be driving, he'll talk. And then I'll notice there's some energy. Oh, you said this about, can you tell me more? And then there's a whole other story that happens, right? So it's really a practice of deep listening. Okay, next. This is what John DeVelder would say a lot. Be willing to enter into their hell. And I write about this in Holding Space. I don't believe that I, at least, can even have the courage to cozy up to someone's hell if I haven't made friends or truce attempts to the parts of myself that I don't like, the parts of myself I wish I didn't have, the parts of my story I'm ashamed of, the parts of myself that I wouldn't want people to know about. If I keep those at arm's length, if I keep my own shadow hidden in the corner, I don't believe I can walk into a room where shadow is going to explode around me, because it is so hard, and be present well. Okay, next. So this is a great technique when it comes to holding space and companioning well. So first, I would suggest getting to know your own terrain, like your own inner landscape. Second, when I'm in a conversation with a person who's grieving, I try to remember this: comfort in, dump out. It's called the Susan Silk is a psychologist in California, and she calls it the ring theory. And in this theory, the idea is if at the center of the circle is the person who's most hurt, or the people who are most impacted, and then with each concentric circle, the pain lessens, but they're all impacted, but the pain lessens, then the work of all of us, wherever we fall in that diagram, is to comfort in. So the people who are hurting more than us, we bring our heart to. We show up with, listening ears. We show up with food. We show up, hey, can I take the kids to the zoo today and give you some space? We plant trees in the remembrance of babies that died. We comfort. And then when our own triggers get triggered and it's hard and it's like, God, that scared me, or that, what if that happened to me, or what if my son died? Then instead of sharing our own fears with those who are more bereaved, we turn to the circle behind us and dump out. So I call then my friend who's a step away from my own sorrow and say, can I just talk for 10 minutes? I need to tell you this story. And then process with people who are in less of need of comfort than the people I've just comforted. So I hope that's helpful. I think it's a great model. And it comes from the work I said of Susan Silk, but she was interviewed and she helped co-write an article for the LA Times called How Not to Say the Wrong Thing. So if we don't have the soft skills, what they would call in outdoor leadership, there's hard skills and soft skills. So I did a 23-day trip outdoors once and learned to be an outdoor educator. And the hard skills are, can you tie a bowline knot? Do you know how to put up your tent? Can you rescue yourself if you're falling down the snowy mountain and use your ice axe without, stabbing yourself? Do you have the hard skills of knowing how to fix someone's blister? Hard skills. Soft skills. How do you navigate group dynamic? What happens if someone's really scared? What happens if you're scared? Are you listening well? What happens if someone's going really slow and people are annoyed, right? People skills, soft skills. So all of you are being trained in, I hope both. You have the hard skills of like, what does it mean to be a home funeral guide? What do you do with the body? How do you wash the body? Or how do you support a family in washing the body, right? What are the laws in your state? So kind of the hard skills. The soft skills, how do you show up? How do you show up for yourself? What do you do if you get really triggered? How do you listen well? Can we listen without trying to fix? Can we comfort in and dump out? Okay. Next slide. And I love this. A midwife friend of mine wrote these things, and she's writing about birth and what it's like to also show up when a birth becomes a death. And she writes, I will show appropriate emotion. That how I do that is not to overcry her or not to over celebrate, because that takes away from her grief or her joy. My emotions should also support hers in the moment, and in the aftermath, I need to explore what mine are. So that's that dump out. Like in the moment, I'm comforting in. And I can be human. I can cry. If a baby dies and I'm the doula, I have cried. I should, I believe, show appropriate emotion. If I'm stone cold, the mom's going to look at me and be like, what, Amy? Are you even with me? But if I'm the loudest one crying in the room, that's a problem because it's taking away from her grief. So I need to be appropriate. And if I'm too triggered to be appropriate, I need to step away and find someone to hold space for me. Okay. Okay, next. Okay, so I'm circling back and I'm ending these slideshows, but I really, really hope this has been helpful, because what I've tried to do is just give you a thumbnail sketch of some of the scholarship, some of the work that I've done. And if it interests you to read my books or to get to know me more, to take courses with me, I so welcome you. I love the National Home Funeral Alliance work, and I want to be fully supportive of your organization's vision and to support each member in developing and deepening the incredible soft skills you already have. Okay, next slide. So here's a picture that always makes me smile. I love this image of these warm-hearted women. This was just in June this summer. I went to DC and I led a workshop called Loving, Dying, and Letting Go. And it covers my second book, you know, in some depth, and certainly more depth than what I've done here. But after 5 hours together, these were the smiles of having listened, cried, studied, partnered up and discussed, you know, meditated together. This is the energy that I believe is healing energy for our culture and our world. Go ahead. And that just involves just a lot of teaching and listening and talking and growing. So each of you will be teachers in your own way, and you're working with families. And I think it's really important to know your work and to know those hard skills, but also to know how to listen and to soften and to listen to self. Okay? So coming back to this picture, when you look at it, what do you see? What does it mean to hold space? What does it mean to companion? There's such a gentleness here. There's sorrow here, but there's peace too. And if that old man who is my grandpa represents parts of our own lives that die along the way, right? Because birth and death for me aren't just two things that happen in a life. They happen a lot in one life. There's the end of a career. There's the birth of a new move. There's the end of a relationship. There's the birth of a new relationship. I mean, he for me is my grandpa for sure, but he also represents the parts of all of us to me that die along the way as we live. And can we show up to those pieces of us that are dying with this kind of love? That's the question. So if any of these questions interested you and you want to go further, not only with me, but in a community of about 250 professionals who are trained in birth or death or mindful living, you are more than welcome to join the Institute for the study of birth, breath, and death. And usually membership, which is lifelong, you just pay once and you're in forever, is $130, but for the month of August, it's $30. So if you want to get in on that good summer deal, Danny will give you my email address, and it's right here at the bottom. You're welcome to join. Anyone is welcome to join. You don't have to be a professional in this work. You could be anyone interested in this topic. So let me conclude by thanking Danny, thanking all, and I hope what I've said is helpful. And now I'm open to ideas and questions, and thank you, Tim, for being behind the scenes, moving these slides. Thank you. So I believe that's the last one. Let's check. Will you? Yeah, the last one. Okay.
Great. Amy, thank you so much. That was really helpful. So I'm going to just say really quick that I'm aware that my son is playing an electric ukulele in the other room, and I'm hoping that my headphones are enough to tune it out. But if someone just alerts me, if you can hear the electric ukulele, I can stick my head out and make it stop. Anywho, you said something while you were talking that I've never heard you say before. You said it's a humbling hurt. And I just want to like pause on that for a second, because that line, you were talking about when someone asks, you know, what do I say? And that question, and I know that in my teaching, that's probably the question that I get the most when I'm teaching about grief, is people just want to know that they can say the right thing. And I think that that's one of the things we're the most afraid of when we're facing someone who's facing grief, is that worry of saying the right thing and saying the wrong thing. And so I don't know if this is a question as much as just to like point that out and to say it again, that line, it's a humbling hurt. I feel like I can use that to companion myself in those moments, like just as a reminder that it is humbling to walk into a space and not know what to say. And I just appreciate that now I'll have you on my shoulder, just reminding me, and I think we can all use that, just like it's a humbling hurt. Like I'm humbled by the fact that I don't know what to say right now. So thank you for just even that little morsel. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that specifically, but that's important to me.
Yeah, it brings tears to my eyes, because in my professional work, you know, I'll get phone calls or Skype requests or emails, people sharing some of the most difficult moments of their life. And as I compose a response, it is incredibly humbling to even begin to try to weave some words together to say, I've heard you, I hear you, I care, and I'm here.
Yeah, we have to trust ourselves so much to even be willing to open our mouths in those moments. And that to me is the best cheerleader you could have given me. I want to ask you about practices that cultivate discomfort. You know, again, with all of this work again with grief, that's what I come to the most, is that, you know, our desire to order that grief process really comes from a desire not to be uncomfortable, not to be in the weeds, not to be in the hell. And I think that's what I love the most about all of you all that show up for things like this, is that you have a desire to learn how to walk into that room and be of service and be helpful. And what I've learned is that the only way that I can do that well is when I remind myself before turning that doorknob and walking in that this is gonna be uncomfortable and that's okay. And so I wonder, you know, I know that you're a yoga teacher, I know that you're a birth worker, so you have some wisdom around entering discomfort purposefully. And I wonder if there's wisdom that you can share around what it means to cultivate discomfort and how we might, or cultivate an ease with discomfort rather, and how we can do that.
It's a great question, because the definition of holding space, the working definition I employ, which is to be compassionately present to what is, becomes challenging when what is really hard. Because who the hell wants to be compassionately present? You know, it's like the fight, flight, freeze instinct in the body is primal, it's deep, we share it with reptiles, you know, it's like incredibly wired in us that if something's unpleasant or difficult, it could also be dangerous. Right? It threatens something in me, whether it's psychological or emotional or physical. So if I'm walking down the street and a stranger approaches me with a knife, being compassionately present may mean very much like defending myself, calling for help, having boundaries, very, very clear boundaries. So I want to make sure I'm clear that holding space doesn't mean we're just always so open and soft and willing to just flow, because there are people who are manipulative, there are people who are abusive, there are people who are cruel, who could take advantage of a person with no boundaries. So for me, holding space, being willing to enter into difficulty, is it also knowing how to navigate difficulty well, which is also protecting of self, protecting of life. But if it's only protecting order, right? If I am using my boundaries to protect order instead of protect life, which life itself can involve chaos and does involve chaos, then I believe cutting myself off from a huge part of not only who I am, but what life is. So how do I cultivate, what kind of practices would help a person be compassionately present to difficulty that's not actually threatening anything except our emotional and mental, agenda to have order? And one thing that came to mind, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there's a whole practice, a deep practice of meditating on death, imagining the corpse as it decomposes, imagining one's own death, imagining the sky burial in Tibetan Buddhism where the birds eat the body, right? So there's in the spiritual traditions, religious tradition, monks and nuns and lay people are taught to meditate on death and the gruesome parts of death, actually, even just to let the mind sort of like sit with it. Now, in our culture, I think that the crucifixion image in the Christian Western tradition and the whole passion story for those who are Christian is a way, a parallel story, and if we use the Tibetan model, to get to know and settle into a relationship with deep discomfort and sorrow, right? So I think that there's traditions that are old and ancient that have at their heart some really difficult parts that adherents are asked to like think about, meditate on, pray about, look at. And we walk into a church, there's a man on a cross. That's pretty difficult. Like in real life, if we had seen a crucifixion of anyone, super, super difficult, really awful, actually. So, that's the work and for me, I don't like to watch horror movies. I don't watch scary movies, but my mind can create some really good ones. So late at night, if I'm alone in the apartment and my son's asleep and I'm like starting to hear funny sounds, I instead of pushing it away and turning on lights, I'm like, what is that about? What is that? Like lean into it a little, get to know those kind of edgy places and because I know I'm actually safe. Now, if someone's actually in the apartment, it's a different thing. But if I'm working with the energy of fear instead of the reality of fear, I think that there's wisdom to get to know, well, where is that fear coming from? What is that about? Getting to know our bodies, my body, my mind, my spirit. So one great way to answer your question would be to begin a practice of silent meditation, a daily practice of sitting still, because fear is a part of every day, discomfort is a part of every day, discouragement is a part of every day. There's moments that are hard. And if I sit still every day, I'm going to get to know both the light and the shadow in myself better.
That's a great answer.
I hope so. You're welcome. That's what I can come up with right now.
I forgot that I'm supposed to let other people ask questions. I have like all these things I want to say to you because you're one of my favorite people to talk to. But let me just pause for a second and see if, I don't know, Tim, if there's any questions on the chat coming through. I don't see any, or if anybody wants to turn their video back on. I'm just going to scroll through the faces and give you an opportunity to hold up your little candle if you want to say something. And if not, don't worry, I will ask for more questions. But let's just pause for half a second here. I'm looking to see all your pretty faces. Anybody?
While you are looking, I have a couple things in the chat.
Oh, good.
Let me try to read this out without leaving anything out. So this is from Beth in Boston. The loving kindness meditation has varying levels of discomfort to play with too. Photographs of the dying or recently dead are still unusual for many people, and yet very moving, instructive, persuasive. As part of your presentation, part of witnessing also seems to be photographing. This is an area that I'm interested in. What has been your experience with families' openness to photographs? Is it appreciated or not? And how do you navigate or read that possibility?
Well, thank you, Beth. Those are great questions, great observations. Yeah, the metta or loving kindness meditation does often include sending a blessing to people who've harmed us. So that does lean into discomfort. And then the reflection on images of the dying, which can be difficult because they're not common, but can be really healing and actually beautiful on many levels too. And your interest in to ask about my experience with photography, I see that most in my work when birth and death meet. So when I'm with families and there's a stillbirth, whether it's unanticipated or anticipated, or if there's an infant death and people know that this little one will only have maybe an hour to live, photography is a big piece of how that family will remember the short life of their child. And there's a whole organization called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep that is a collection of professional photographers who volunteer their time to enter into hospitals or homes or birth centers and create beautiful portraits of mothers or fathers holding their dead infants in beautiful ways. And it was founded by a woman named Cheryl Haggard, whose son Maddox died. And she said it was absolutely the most horrible day of her life. However, the images that were taken, the pictures that were taken that day by a photographer, and then the two of them founded Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. She said they're some of the most beautiful, treasured images she has. So there's this incredible juxtaposition in her reflection. So in my experience as a hospital chaplain, I rarely saw people pull out the camera as grandma's dying or as their husband's dying, but those memories are seared into my heart and mind. But I didn't see people pull out the phone and take pictures. It's not something I saw much. But I do think, certainly consent is absolutely required. And having that conversation beforehand, in the training that I've done, with Henry Frisco-Weiss and in that tradition of teaching how to hold vigil, and you talk with people before death is too close. What would you want? What's important to you? That's where I think discussing the potential of photographing needs to be. And people may have really strong feelings right away and say absolutely not or yes, or they may say I'm not sure. Let's figure that out in the moment. And for me as a mom, when I gave birth to my son, I knew I didn't want any pictures. I was like, and I had been a doula for over 40 births at that point, and I'd seen a variety of approaches to photography and birth, and I just for myself knew right away, don't take a picture. I don't want any pictures of this. So some people have really strong senses right away. Beth, thank you for that question. I hope that what I said was helpful.
Let's do this one more question from Megan here that she typed in, because we are running out of time. We'll have to have you back really soon, Amy. So Megan says, can you share examples of language or methods you use when you are holding space for others and find you need to take space for yourself? So I think she's saying, like, how do you break that connection and get out of the room gracefully?
Right.
Great question.
I usually just say I gotta go. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. First of all, having a good sense of humor is really important, in our own work, because we're dealing with such solemn kind of heavy topics. So as we discuss best practices, sometimes it's good to be a little witty. And the serious answer, though, is I have experienced one time as a chaplain where I was way over my head. Just like fully, like someone threw me in the freaking deep end of the pool and I couldn't figure out how to get up. And in that situation, I turned to the son who I was in dialogue with, and his mother was unconscious and dying of cancer, really in her last possibly like hours. And he didn't want to believe she was dying. He believed she was possessed by the devil. And he had asked me to come in the room and perform an exorcism. And I just don't even know how to pretend to do that. And I didn't believe that was the case. And it was like, obviously death, denial. I was just like floored. The last thing I expected, you talk about turning the doorknob and knowing it's going to be difficult. Well, I turned the doorknob and I fell into way into the deep end of my comfort level. And because if you've read my book, Holding Space, you know that my mom's mental illness that played a big role of grief in my childhood had a lot to do with like supernatural fear and like the devil and stuff. So like it was a huge trigger like of the little girl in me, to have someone think that their mother was possessed, and that I was asked to like participate in some kind of like otherworldly exorcism. And the way I extricated myself from that, which may not have been as graceful as I could have today, was to say, I don't believe I'm the right chaplain to serve you. I think that what you're asking and what I can give don't match. So I'm going to ask you to consider who might be able to show up within your faith community. And if there's anything I could do, you know, let me know, but there's just no way I even know how to meet you right now. And so I was just really honest. I was eye contact, I was really clear. And I positioned it as, I'm not able to serve you. Now that's a situation where I actually left and didn't return to try to navigate. And if I need a break, it's different. I could say, you know, I really need to take some time to get some water, or use the restroom. Like I may use my body as a way to say, I need to care for my body, and then go into a bathroom and cry, right? If I don't want to be fully transparent about the fact that I'm being deeply triggered. If I am and I want to be present to that, I could say, this is a really painful moment for your family, and I want to honor that. I also want to honor that it's bringing some emotion up for me. So I like to take a 15-minute break, and I'll return to you. Don't worry, I'll be back, but I'm going to take some self-care time. And then I'm modeling to the family how to do that too. Like I'm letting those around me see, like, gosh, she's caring for self with this approach, and I have the right to do that too. So I hope that's helpful.
I'm so glad that you threw that piece in at the end, because I think that that's where it really comes together, that, you know, as guides and while we're companioning and holding space, that skill, that's what I keep learning about deeper and deeper. It's like I can compartmentalize my feelings and like show up really well and help, you know, and go into their hell. But it's that pulling myself out skill and caring for myself is really the harder piece. And so it gives me a lot of permission to care for myself through that doorway of realizing that when I care for myself, I'm helping others. And I feel like I learned that from you as well, that actually self-care is a form of caring for others. And whoa, like take that in a little bit for those of us who don't self-care well. Amy Glenn, thank you so much for sharing yourself with us for a while. I would just love to keep going, but I'm going to respect your time and everybody else's time and wrap this up right now. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about? I know you've got some classes coming up. I know you shared with us the Institute and your books. I will include, when I send the link to everybody, I will include the link. When I include the link to the webinar, I will also include the link to the Institute. But are there any classes coming up that you specifically want people to know about? I know there was the World Religions thing happening.
Right. Yes. Okay. So there are 2 courses coming up that may be of interest to this community. On August 30th, so the last Friday of this month, I launch a 10-week course. It's called Understanding World Religions for Birth and Death Doulas. And I took 5 of the major religions, and we'll spend 2 weeks per religion. So my master's degree is in comparative religion, and I spent 11 years teaching courses on comparative religion. So it's really, really fun for me to take all that knowledge that I love and apply it to a world I adore, the doula world. So to like merge those 2 kids, I'm just so excited for this course. And we have a good number signed up already, and there's scholarships available. So if you look at it and you're like, I couldn't afford this, just email me. So I don't like to turn anyone away. So don't let money stop you from doing it. But I also want to say, if you're not available for 10 Fridays in a row, don't worry about that either, because like what you're doing, Deanna, you record them. So all of that's recorded, and people can watch when they can. It could be 3 a.m. and you pop some popcorn and pour a Jack and Coke and learn about Hinduism, you know, fine. It doesn't have to be with me. You can just do it in your own time. So that's one course. And then in September, I'm doing a much shorter course, but just a 5-hour exploration, but it's called advanced holding space for pregnancy loss training. So it's really for anyone, but particularly for those who have already done some work on this topic. And it's a short recap of key ideas, but also an examination of a book. And you know the author, it's Diana Vagianos Armentrout's book, Walking the Labyrinth
of My Heart.
And I use her book as a way to like, let's go deep into one woman's story. So that's in September. So thank you for giving me the chance to share that. Thank you. And thank you for asking good questions and for welcoming me to share that slideshow. I hope it was helpful. I really do.
It was just fantastic. Thanks so much. And I will remind everybody that coming up in October is the National Home Funeral Alliance Conference in Chaska, Minnesota. It's going to be so fun. We have an amazing lineup of speakers. So if you haven't registered yet to join us and you're thinking about it, please do. We're so excited to have you. It's on a beautiful lake that's an important bird area, and there's just lots of opportunities for walking by the lake and having amazing conversations. And then lastly, there is one more webinar in this 4-webinar series next month in September. This one, I haven't figured out if I'm going to have people register yet, just so I know how many are coming, but this one will be free. And I'm calling it a community meeting. So I feel like the NHFA, we all want to know each other, and we come on these webinars and I see all your faces and I want to hear your stories. And so my hope is that just the right number of people are going to show up, that we'll have a chance to everyone will get to be the speaker and talk a little bit about who they are and how they came to this work. There's a few people whose work I'm going to be highlighting just to make sure that the conversation stays moving. There'll be no pressure to talk. If you don't want to talk and you just want to observe, that'll be okay too. But so next month, you'll get an email. For some reason, the date is leaving me right now, but it's next month, and we're just having an NHFA community meeting. Come get to know your colleagues and friends. And I think I'll leave it there. Thanks, Amy. I love you so much. I'm so grateful for your friendship in work and in the heart. And everyone, just have a great night and reach out when you need us.
Lots of love. Thank you all.
Lots of love.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.